They say blood is thicker than water, but in my family everything is measured in high-octane fuel and the roar of an engine. My father, Silas, saw a collection of vintage Ferraras and Shelby Cobras as the only legacy worth leaving behind. He saw my brother Leo as the rightful heir to the throne of grease and steel, despite the fact that Leo couldn't tell a carburetor from a camshaft. And me? He saw a girl whose hands were too delicate for the garage, a daughter who belonged in a showroom, not under a chassis. I grew up with the scent of oil in my hair and the blueprint of a V8 etched into my soul. But to Silas, I was just a ghost in the workshop. I'm about to prove that legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you build, bolt by bolt from the scraps everyone else threw away. My name is Jax, and I'm going to show them that the most dangerous thing on the road is the girl they left in the rearview mirror. The garage smelled of history and heartbreak. It was a cathedral of chrome, housing 40 of the rarest automobiles in the world. I stood by the workbench, my knuckles bruised and stained with black grease, holding a torque wrench like a scepter. I had just finished rebuilding the transmission on the 1967 Mustang Fastback, the crown jewel of this Sterling collection. "It's purring, Dad," I said, wiping my forehead with a rag. The timing was off by a fraction, but she's ready for the Concours d'Elegance. Silas didn't even look at the car. He didn't look at my grease-stained overalls. He looked at Leo, who was leaning against a pristine Porsche, scrolling through his phone and wearing a suit that cost more than a high-end engine block. "Good," Silas said, his voice cold and industrial. "Leo, take the keys. It's time you started showing up at the auctions as the face of Sterling Motors. The collection is yours now. All of it. The cars, the shop, the name." The wrench slipped from my hand, clattering against the concrete floor. "What? Dad, I've been the lead mechanic here for 6 years. I'm the one who keeps these machines alive. Leo doesn't even know how to check the oil?" "Exactly," Silas barked, finally turning to me. His eyes were hard, filled with a traditionalism that felt like a cage. "Leo is a Sterling man. He'll manage the assets. You're a girl, Jax. You shouldn't be covered in masute and soot. It's unseemly. You've had your fun playing in the dirt, but the business needs a proper heir. I've set up a trust for you. Not for a nice apartment and a boutique, something cleaner." "I don't want a boutique," I whispered, the air leaving my lungs. "I want my workshop. I want the heritage we built together." "There is no together," Leo smirked, jingling the keys to the Mustang. "Dad's right. You're a liability in a place like this. A girl in the pit is a bad look for the brand. Pack your tools, Jocks. We're rebranding, and grease-stained daughter isn't in the brochure. Pack my tools." I felt a hot, sharp spark of rage ignite in my chest. "I built half the engines in this room. Then you should have no trouble building a life somewhere else," Silas said, turning his back on me. "Leave the keys to the service bay on the bench. You're done here." I stood in the center of the garage, the 40 masterpieces I had pampered and protected suddenly looking like strangers. I realized then that I was never a daughter to Silas. I was just an unpaid technician who had outlived her usefulness. I walked to the corner of the shop, past the rows of gleaming paint, to a pile of scrap metal Silas had intended to sell to the junk dealer. In the middle of the heap lay a blackened, heavy cast iron blacker prototype engine component from an experimental 1950s project that had failed. It was rusted, pitted, and seemingly useless. Silas called it the anchor because it was only good for holding a boat in place. I picked it up. It weighed 40 pounds of pure, unrefined potential. "I'm taking this," I said, my voice as steady as a calibrated cylinder. Leo laughed. "The scrap? Fitting. Go ahead, Jocks. Take the trash. It's the only thing in this garage that matches your future." I didn't say another word. I threw the anchor into the back of my beat-up truck and drove out of the Sterling gates without looking back. They thought they had kept the treasure and given me the waste. They thought the power was in the polished exterior and the famous badge. But as I looked at the rusted block in my passenger seat, I saw something they couldn't the thermal geometry of a revolution. I wasn't just an engineer. I was a creator, and I was going to use their trash to build an empire that would make their collection look like a pile of toy cars. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in my life, I was the one behind the wheel. My new headquarters was a far cry from the climate-controlled marble floors of Sterling Motors. It was a corrugated metal shack on the edge of the industrial district, where the roof leaked when it rained, and the only security system was a heavy iron bolt on the door. But it was mine. No Silas to tell me I was too delicate, no Leo to mock my stains. I spent the first 3 months living on black coffee and adrenaline. The anchor, that rusted, blackened block of iron, sat on my workbench under a harsh fluorescent light. To anyone else, it was junk. But as I stripped away decades of corrosion with a wire brush and acid, the true geometry of the piece began to emerge. It wasn't just a failed prototype. It was a masterpiece of metallurgy that had been decades ahead of its time. The alloy was a high silicon ceramic composite, capable of withstanding temperatures that would melt a modern racing engine. The engineers in the 50s hadn't lacked vision. They had lacked the fuel injection technology to make it breathe. But I have it, I whispered, the blue light of my laptop screen reflecting in my goggles, while I was refining the thermal cycles of the anchor. I kept a digital eye on Sterling Motors. It was a train wreck in slow motion. Leo had already sold the 1967 Mustang I had rebuilt. He didn't sell it to a collector. He sold it to a hedge fund manager who didn't know how to drive a manual. Then went the Shelby, then the GTO. Silas was silent, tucked away in his study, watching his heir dismantle 40 years of work to pay for bad investments and a lifestyle built on champagne and ego. They were liquidating the past to fund a hollow present. Meanwhile, I was building the future. I spent my last $1,000 on a custom-milled crankshaft and a set of high-pressure injectors. I spent 18 hours a day machining, grinding, and calibrating. My hands were permanently stained a dark metallic gray, and my back ached from leaning over the lathe. There were nights when the cold in the shack was so biting I had to sleep next to the welding torch for warmth. But then came the morning of the first test fire. I rigged the engine, now a hybrid of 1950s heavy metal and 2020s digital precision, to a makeshift dynamometer. My heart hammered against my ribs like a piston. If I was wrong, the block would shatter and the anchor would finally live up to its name. I turned the ignition. The starter motor groaned a low mechanical plea. Then, with a violent coughing roar, the engine caught. It didn't sound like a normal car. It sounded like a jet turbine combined with a thunderstorm, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated the very foundation of the shack. I looked at the monitor. The thermal efficiency numbers were off the charts. It was producing twice the horsepower of a standard V8 with half the fuel consumption. And the heat? The anchor didn't even flinch. It stayed cool, radiating power with a terrifying, silent grace. I did it, I breathed, tears blurring my vision as I watched the data curves climb. You were never an anchor. You were a heart. I took a photo of the glowing manifold and sent it to an old contact at the Global Automotive Review, anonymously. I labeled it Project Phoenix. Within 2 hours, my encrypted inbox was flooded with inquiries from Detroit, Stuttgart, and Tokyo. The world was looking for a revolution, and I was holding it in a grease-stains shack, but I wasn't ready to sell. Not yet. I didn't just want a career. I wanted my house back. I wanted the garage where I grew up, and I knew that as long as Leo was at the helm of Sterling Motors, it was only a matter of time before the last car, the one Silas loved more than his own children, hit the auction block. I sat back in my oil-slicked chair, listening to the beautiful, savage song of my engine. Silas had told me to find a cleaner life. "Sorry, Dad," I said, wiping a streak of oil across my cheek. "I think I'll stay in the dirt. It's much easier to hide a diamond here." The automotive world was on fire. Every tech blog and engineering journal was speculating about the Phoenix engine, the mystery power unit that had shattered every efficiency record at the private testing tracks in Germany. Investors were calling it the Tesla killer, but no one knew who owned the patent. I kept the paperwork locked in a safe deposit box and the prototype under a heavy tarp in my shack, with the first installment of my licensing fee staggering. 7-figure sum that felt surreal in my grease-stained hands. I didn't buy a mansion. I bought information. I found out exactly how deep the hole was that Leo had dug. Sterling Motors wasn't just struggling. It was a hollow shell. To cover a series of disastrous bets on luxury real estate, Leo had leveraged the very walls of our family garage. Now the bank was calling in the markers. To save himself, Leo announced the Sterling Legacy auction. It was the fire sale of the century. 25 cars, including the legendary 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO, the car my father had forbidden me to even touch because it was too precious for a girl's clumsy hands. The auction was held at a high-end gallery downtown. I didn't show up in overalls. I went to a high-end tailor and had a suit made charcoal gray, sharp enough to cut glass, with the sleeves tailored just enough to show the faint, permanent oil shadows beneath my fingernails. I didn't want to look like a socialite. I wanted to look like the woman who owned the road. When I walked into the gallery, the air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and desperation. I saw Silas sitting in the front row, looking frail and diminished, his eyes fixed on the Ferrari as if it were his last link to reality. Leo was near the podium, sweating through his silk shirt, laughing too loudly with potential bidders' jocks. Leo stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. He looked at my suit, then at my face. "What are you doing here? This isn't a soup kitchen. The opening bids here are more than you've made in your entire life. I'm just here to see the Sterling Legacy one last time, Leo," I said, my voice smooth and dangerous. "I heard you're selling the GTO, Dad's heart. You must be really desperate." "It's a strategic liquidation," Leo hissed, leaning in close. "And don't think that just because you put on a nice jacket, you belong here. You're still the girl from the pit. We'll see who belongs where when the hammer falls," I replied. I took a seat in the back, away from the spotlights. The auction began, and it was a massacre. The Porsche went to a collector from Dubai. The Jaguar went to a museum in London. Each time a car was sold, I saw Silas flinch, his hand tightening on his cane. He was watching his life being dismantled piece by piece by the son he had chosen. Finally, the Ferrari 250 GTO rolled onto the stage. The room went silent. This wasn't just a car. It was a piece of history. The opening bid was $30 million. 35. A tech mogul from the front row shouted. 40. Shouted a representative from a European conglomerate. Leo was grinning now, his eyes glazed with greed. He saw his debt disappearing. He saw his freedom. 50 million, the tech mogul countered. The auctioneer looked around. 50 million once, 50 million twice. I raised my paddle. I didn't even look at the stage. I looked at Silas. 60 million, I said, my voice carrying through the room like a cold wind. The room erupted in whispers. Leo froze. Silas turned around, his eyes squinting through his glasses to find the source of the bid. When he saw me, his jaw dropped. "Jocks," he whispered. 65. The mogul shouted, looking back at me with irritation. 75, I said instantly, and I'll buy the remaining lot of spare parts and the workshop equipment as a bundle. Cash. Immediate transfer. The auctioneer was stunned. 75 million for the GTO and the inventory. Going once, twice, sold. To the lady in the charcoal suit, the room became a blur of motion. Journalists surged toward me, but I ignored them. I walked straight to the podium where Leo stood, his face pale and sweating. "Where did you get that kind of money?" he stammered. You were living in a shack. You stole that money." "I didn't steal anything, Leo. I built it," I said, leaning over the podium so only he could hear. I took the anchor you threw in the trash and I turned it into the most valuable engine patent on the planet. I just bought back Dad's pride with the junk you were too stupid to understand. I turned to Silas, who was still sitting in his chair, looking at me as if I were a stranger. The GTO isn't leaving the garage, Dad, I said. But the keys ain't yours anymore. And they certainly aren't Leo's. I walked out of the gallery before the first flashbulbs could go off. I had the car. I had the parts. Now it was time to take back the shop. The iron gates of the Sterling estate didn't creak when I opened them. They felt heavy, as if the very air of the driveway was thick with the ghost of my father's expectations. I drove my beat-up truck, the same one I'd used to haul the anchor, aware right past the rows of empty parking spots where the collection used to sit. I didn't head for the mansion. I headed for the garage. I stepped inside, the cathedral was cold. Most of the cars were gone, replaced by oil stains and the hollow echo of Leo's failure. I saw my brother in the glass-walled office frantically throwing papers into a briefcase. He looked like a cornered rat. The bank said the mortgage was bought out, Leo shouted the moment he saw me. They said a holding company called Ironheart closed the foreclosure in 2 hours. That's you, isn't it? You are the one who stripped the roof from over my head. I didn't strip it, Leo. You gambled it away, I said, tossing the heavy set of master keys onto the desk. They made a sharp, final sound. I just caught the keys before they hit the dirt. As of 8 a.m., I own this land, this building, and every wrench left inside it. You have 30 minutes to pack your personal belongings. The rest, the equipment, the remaining inventory belongs to Phoenix Industries. You can't do this. I'm the heir. You're a tenant with a past due notice, I replied, crossing my arms. And honestly, you're lucky I'm not suing you for the damage you did to the brand. No, get out. My construction crew is arriving in an hour. Leo grabbed his briefcase, his face a mask of impotent rage. He tried to shove past me, but he stopped when he saw Silas standing in the doorway. Our father looked older than I had ever seen him. The fire was gone from his eyes, replaced by a confused, hollow stare. Leah, Silas whispered. Is it true? Is the shop gone? Ask your daughter, Leo spat, gesturing wildly at me. The mechanic is the new landlord. I hope you're happy, Dad. You wanted a Sterling to run this place? And now you've got one who smells like a junkyard. Leo stormed out, his tires screeching on the gravel, a petty, loud exit that suited him. Silas stayed. He walked slowly toward the center of the bay, his cane clicking against the concrete. He stopped at the spot where the GTO used to sit. I watched the news, Jocks, he said, his voice trembling. They're calling your engine the greatest breakthrough in 50 years. They say you've managed to do what the giants in Germany and Japan couldn't. I didn't do it alone, Dad, I said, walking over to the workbench. I picked up a small polished fragment of the anchor alloy. I did it with the scrap you told me was trash. I found the genius in the thing you discarded, just like you did with me. Silas looked down at his boots, the silence between us stretching like an unbridgeable canyon. I thought I was protecting you, the world I grew up in. It wasn't kind to women who wanted to get their hands dirty. I thought if I gave the business to Leo, you'd be safe from the struggle. Safe? I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You didn't protect me, Silas. You erased me. You let me build your engines and then told the world a man did it. You let me save your cars and then told me I wasn't worthy of them. I see that now, he said, and for the first time in my life, he looked me directly in the eyes without a trace of condescension. I was a fool. I followed a map that was out of date. You aren't just a mechanic. You're the architect of the Sterling name. Not Leo, not me. The Sterling name is dead, I said, turning my back on him to look at the blueprints I had laid out for the renovation. This is Phoenix Industries now. I'm turning this garage into a high-end research facility. No showrooms, no sales pitches, just engineering. And the GTO? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. The car you bought at the auction? It's coming back here, I said, but not to sit under a silk cover. I'm going to pull the original engine I'm going to put a Phoenix V prototype inside it. I'm going to drive it, Dad, at 200 miles per hour. And the world is going to see exactly what Masood can actually build. Silas stood there for a long time watching me work. He didn't ask for a cheer. He didn't offer advice. He just watched his daughter reclaim her birthright, one bolt at a time. I didn't offer him a place in the new company, and he didn't ask for one. I had my garage back. I had my technology. And for the first time, the only person I had to prove anything to was the woman staring back at me from the polished chrome. The transformation of the Sterling garage into the Phoenix HQ was nearly complete. The old oil-soaked floor was now white epoxy, and the air was filtered and pressurized. In the center of the bay stood the Aegis One, the first supercar to house the full-scale Phoenix engine. It was a masterpiece of carbon fiber and raw mechanical aggression. But as the world's press began to descend on the valley for the unveiling, a silent alarm triggered on my encrypted server. Someone had accessed the internal design schematics for the fuel injection subsystem. Someone who still had a legacy bypass code I had forgotten to scrub. Leo. Sat in the darkened control room, watching the security footage from 3 hours ago. My brother had used an old service entrance key to sneak into the archive room. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a desperate addict. He was photographing the blueprints with a high-res camera, his hands shaking. He wasn't just stealing. He was selling our soul to Titan Automotive, our biggest corporate rival. He thinks he's found his golden ticket, I whispered, watching him vanish into the night. Should I call the police, Jux? My head of security asked. No, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Let him go. He didn't realize that the schematics in the public archive folder are the ones I rejected 2 months ago, the ones with the thermal instability flaw. Leo didn't know that the Phoenix engine was a living thing, required a specific proprietary cooling algorithm to prevent the ceramic block from cracking under high pressure. Without that code, the engine was a ticking time bomb. The next day, Titan Automotive announced a surprise breakthrough at their own press conference, scheduled just 3 hours before my own. They claimed to have developed a Titan core engine that mirrored my specifications. They were trying to steal my thunder, to claim I had stolen the tech from them. I stood backstage at my event, watching Titan's live stream on a monitor. Leo was there standing next to the Titan CEO, looking smug and triumphant. He had traded the family secrets for a seat at their table and a payout that would cover his debts. And now the Titan CEO beamed. We will demonstrate the power of the Titan core. They fired up their prototype on a high-speed dyno. The roar was deafening, a brutal metallic scream. I watched the thermal sensors on their display. By degrees, lil by degrees, by degrees, at 950 degrees. The rejected fuel injection map I had left for Leo began to flood the chambers, crack. The sound was like a gunshot. A spiderweb of fractures raced across the Titan engine block. A second later, the entire unit disintegrated in a spectacular cloud of white smoke and molten alloy. The stream cut to black as the crowd panicked. Leo's face, captured in the final frame, was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He hadn't just failed. He had publicly humiliated the largest automotive company in the world with stolen, faulty tech. Timing is everything, I said, checking my watch. I walked out onto my own stage. The room was packed with journalists who had just seen Titan's disaster. They were skeptical, terrified, and hungry for the truth. I heard there was a bit of a breakdown across town, I said into the microphone, my voice calm and resonant. That's what happens when you try to build a future using a map you didn't draw. You see, the Phoenix engine isn't just a piece of metal. It's a precision instrument, and it only answers to the person who knows how it breathes. I signaled my team. The Aegis One roared to life. It didn't scream. It hummed with a terrifying predatory power. I pushed the throttle to the limit. The Thermal sensors stayed green. The engine glowed with a soft, ethereal heat, stable and perfect. Dot in the front row. Silas sat with his head down. He knew. He knew that Leo had tried to destroy me one last time. And he knew that I had finally, decisively, ended the Sterling brothers' career. Engineering isn't about the blueprints you can steal, I told the silent room. It's about the soul you put into the metal. And you can't photocopy your soul. That night, Titan Automotive filed a massive lawsuit against Leo for corporate espionage and fraud. He wouldn't just be broke this time, he would be in a federal prison. I had finally purged the last of the rot from the garage,